Alright, I've been impressed to do this video for those who are going to be here to go through what's about to happen. Because soon there's going to be a rapture. And when that happens, they're going to try to explain it away. Right? People have questions, but they're not going to tell people the truth. We're going to have these fallen angels come claiming to be extraterrestrials, aliens. And they're going to say some BS, such as the people that were taken, they were taken because they've elevated themselves to a standard of godhood, so they're going to the next level, and you can too if you follow us in what we're teaching. Or they're going to say something along the lines of, and maybe both of these, that the people that were taken just weren't fit for the vibration of the earth and where the earth is going, and they were taken out of the way so that everybody else can evolve and be happy, right? Because they were getting in the way. So they might do one of those or both of those kind of stories. So I figured I'm going to show you this through the scriptures, right? And as you can see here, I want to get into Daniel chapter 2. Now, in Daniel chapter 2, I suggest you read it. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, but when he wakes up, he can't remember the dream, but it troubles him, like it's really hit him right in the heart, and his emotions are getting to him, like he's bothered by it, right? But he can't remember it, and so he calls all the soothsayers and astrologers and witch doctor kind of people to give him the interpretation of the dream, and they were like, okay, well, tell us the dream. And he's like, I don't remember it. So if you truly have some kind of ability, you're going to tell me what my dream was. And they're like, nobody can do that. But Daniel, being the servant of the Most High God, is like, hey, my God can show you the dream and the interpretation thereof. Just give me some time to pray. So he goes, and God gives him the dream and the interpretation thereof. So he comes to Nebuchadnezzar, the king, and tells him his dream. And you ever had that experience where you forget a dream, but then somebody says something, or something happens, and all of a sudden you remember the dream? Well, that's what happened here. As Daniel's describing the dream, he's like, oh, this is it. This was my dream, I remember. And he says it was a giant statue. It had a head of gold. It had chest and arms of silver. It had a belly and thighs of brass. It had legs of iron and feet of iron mixed with clay. And he tells him the interpretation that this represents the kingdoms. That Nebuchadnezzar is the king over Babylon, which represents the head of gold. But an inferior kingdom is going to take over, which ended up happening. The Medo-Persians took over. So you get the two arms. And that's the chest and arms of silver. But then an inferior kingdom takes them over. The Grecian Empire, with Alexander the Great, the belly and thighs of brass. Then a more inferior kingdom of that takes over. And it's the Roman Empire, with iron. And it also splits into two kingdoms, the East and the West, the Orthodox and the Catholic. Right? So we got those two legs. But then eventually it becomes the feet of iron and clay. And it even says those toes represent the kings. And the times of those kings, that's when Jesus actually returns. And that's going to happen real soon. But the thing I really want to get into here is what it says about the iron and the clay, right? It says, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And when you read that, it's like, what? The iron, it's a kingdom, right? Daniel's talking about, oh, you see, another kingdom inferior to there was the third kingdom of brass, right? So he's letting you know these are kingdoms, but he says that this fourth kingdom eventually is going to mingle itself with the seed of men. That the clay represents men, mankind. So what does the iron represent? Something that's not man. And that's very interesting, right? And I think there's a lot of things to this, and they're all true. I've talked about this in other videos where I get into prophecies about in Jeremiah and Isaiah, we read about God's people being the clay and God the potter molding the clay as he sees fit. You can even read in Genesis where Adam is made out of the dust of the earth, out of the earth itself, out of the clay is Adam made. So the clay represents mankind being moldable and shapeable, right? But we also see that this is miry clay, it's dirty clay. And also known as potter's clay, it says, or baked clay, so it's hardened where you can't really shape it anymore. So there's something wrong with the mankind. They become very hard-hearted and what have you, unmoldable, unusable, right? So you can see this in many ways, such as God's people, Israel, rejecting Jesus, saying they have no king but Caesar. So then they themselves, being miry clay now, mixed with the iron Roman Empire, right? And then later on, the Christians do the same thing. They mingling with the Roman Empire that was persecuting him, setting up one of their bishops as the pagan Pontifex Maximus and head of the Western Roman Empire, rejected by the Eastern side, showing that there's still a division from the left leg and the right leg and the left foot from the right foot. And so I see something to that. And there's other people who see, oh yeah, the Roman Empire, being basically Europe, is mixing in right now with Islam. Islam's mixing in, and they're mixing together. They're partly strong and partly weak, but they don't quite mingle together, right? And it's true about all these things. The Jews don't really mingle with the Roman Empire. Their beliefs contradict, and there's always fighting. The same thing with the Christian beliefs and the Catholic hierarchy going on. They're button heads. And then the same thing with all of that. The Roman Empire and Islam, they're mixing together, and they're actually creating Chrislam right now, but they don't quite mix, right? So we can see all these things, and they all seem to be true. But there's something else, too. There's something else. There's another layer to this. And all of these layers are true. You see, when we come over here to Job, I just want to read a couple of passages here. Job chapter 1 at verse 6, it says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." So here we see that God's at his throne, and the angels came to present themselves before God. And they're called the sons of God. But Satan came as well, acting as though he's one of the sons, but God doesn't consider him so, as he's separate from the sons of God. And this is said again over here in Job 2, verse 1. "Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord." Right? So we see that the angels, the ministering spirits, are the sons of God. And when we come over here to Jude, and at verse 6 it says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting change under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day." What this is in a reference to is the sons of God here in Genesis 6, where it says at verse 2 that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, right? So these sons of God are not part of mankind, right? That they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. So it wasn't like an agreement, they just took who they wanted, right? And then that here at verse 4, "There were giants in the earth those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." And these giants were known as the Nephilim. So it seems to be some kind of mixture between the angels and mankind, right? So, yeah, that's kind of creepy, right? And Daniel says that's what it's going to be at the end. At the end, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. That's what we see being said here. And we're right at this. We've already seen and heard the articles about them cloning animals and probably cloning humans and doing all these different experimentation, mixing man and animal, and even artificial breast milk and limbs and organs grown from animals. We see a mixing going on there, not to mention something else. If you've ever listened to alien abduction stories, whether you believe them or not, just the stories, they're usually very sexual in nature. There's something sexual going on. There's something to do with either sperm being taken, eggs being taken, people being impregnated, blood taken, all kinds of weird stuff that has to do with sex, sperm, eggs, and blood. Right? So there's something odd there, that these so-called aliens are not aliens, they're fallen angels. Right? And that's what the Bible is telling us here. I'm going to break down some more things here. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, at verse 2 it says, "For I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I have espoused you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." So here Paul is talking about presenting all the believers as a virgin bride to Jesus. And look what he contrasts it to at verse 3. "But I fear, lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." So you see that there? He equates the serpent beguiling Eve to a loss of virginity. So you see that something's going on there. Something that's not mankind mixing with mankind. Something that's not the clay of man trying to mix with the clay of man. And when we come over here, 1 John chapter 3 at verse 12, it says, "Not as Cain, who was of that wicked one and slew his brother." Right? So we see that Cain was of the wicked one. What does that mean? Well, it seems like it's talking about this right here. That's what it seems to be talking about. Then when we come over here to John chapter 8, at verse 44, it says, this is talking about the religious leaders. It says, "Ye are of your father the devil, and the lust of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it." He's telling these people that their father is of the devil, right? When we go back up to verse 42, Jesus said unto them, "If God were your father, ye would love me, for I proceed forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do ye not understand my speech, even because ye cannot hear my word?" So here, Jesus is saying, if you were of God like I am, you would hear me. Like Jesus says, you would hear me if you were my people. My sheep hear my voice, and they don't follow anybody but the shepherd. Right? But he's saying these people won't because they're not of God. So there's a distinction, but there's people of God and there's people who are not. There's people who are of the clay and there's people who are mingled. Verse 45 says, "And because I tell you the truth, ye believe me not. Which of you convinceth me of sin? And if I say the truth, why do ye not believe me? He that is of God heareth God's words. Ye therefore hear them not, because ye are not of God." So you can see that he's setting up a contrast, that there's people who are not of God. You notice that Jesus doesn't plead with them to repent. Jesus doesn't show them that they're sinners. Jesus doesn't say that I'm going to bear your sins, right? even though he bears the sins of the world, he's telling them that you're of your father, the devil, and that's why you don't hear me, and you're lost. You notice that? Very strange the way he talks to them. He talks to them differently than he talks to the sheep, the wheat, the clay, God's people, right? Very forgiving and merciful, understanding that the world we're in and the mess that we're in, and that he's willing to clean us up and take care of us. But with this certain group, there's none of that. A huge contrast, very huge contrast. And you notice that these people who are not of God always want to seek a high place, whether it's in the government, in the religion, whether it's in a job, the career or business. They always want to be the king, the president, the pope, the high bishop, the high priest, um, somebody who's above somebody, right? We continue with this. Something I brought up in a video about there's something different about Judas, where I get into something along these lines. Is in John 6 at verse 70, Jesus answered them, "Have not I chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil?" Notice that he doesn't say has a devil, given into the devil. He says is a devil. And I was always wondered why Jesus, I shouldn't say always wondered, this is something I've been recently wondering, that Jesus actually rebuked Satan out of Peter when Peter tried to correct Jesus in Matthew 16. Right after Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of the living God, he goes and tells Jesus that he's not going to go to Jerusalem to suffer anything negative and be put to death or anything like that. And immediately Jesus corrects him and says, "Satan, get behind me. You desire the things of men and not of God," and rebukes him and basically rebukes Satan out of Peter right there. But when it comes to Judas, he doesn't do that. Matter of fact, when Judas gets possessed by the devil at the Last Supper, Jesus says, "Go what you got to do and do it quickly." A complete contrast to how they're treated. So I think there's people that are God's people, and there's people who are not God's people. There's people who can be saved, and there's people who can't. I'm gonna break this down a little bit more here, but before I do, you know what? I think I will actually talk about these two passages first. Matthew chapter 13, right here. To save some time, I suggest you pause and read it, or just go to Matthew 13 and read verses 24 through 30, and then the explanation is down here at verses 36 through 43. But I'm going to just paraphrase here. God sows his seed in the earth, and it's the wheat. Satan sows his seed in the earth, it's tares. And they look alike, and they seem alike, and they grow together. Right? But at the end of the world is the harvest. And at that time, the wheat and the tares are going to be separated. But the thing is that the wheat and the tares, they think that they're family. They think that they're friends. They think that they're tight and that they're one and the same, but they're not. They are different. And I get into this a bit in the video. There's something different about Judas, or Judas is different. I don't remember exactly what I titled it, but something like that. And we see that there's a contrast here between the two people, right? And then we come down here to it being explained, and Jesus explains it like I told you, that the wheat are the children of God, of the kingdom. The tares are the children of the devil, right? And a tare is actually toxic. It can be very harmful if you eat it. I believe it's even deadly. So this awakening people are having right now to toxic people, to narcissists, NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. People are waking up to this and how these people are. Very self-centered, lacking empathy, um, very manipulative and controlling, uh, fake. Uh, they're one way in public where they're trying to put off this persona that they're some good, godly man or woman, but behind the scenes they are a devil. Just given some characteristics, some quick ones. There's a lot of detail, and I've actually made some videos about narcissist and NPD and the tears and what have you. So if you're interested, you can check those out, or you can go look up NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, and learn about it. These are toxic people, and it's as if they are actually soulless. There's something really seriously wrong with them. Seriously wrong with them. Um, but we see that the contrast here, that these people, I think, are actually the seed of the devil. And at first I was thinking this is a spiritual thing, that there's something spiritual when we're young, that we make a choice, right? We might not be conscious of it, but we make a choice. Because two people can go through the same experiences, right? And one of them become an empathetic individual, while the other will become a narcissist, right? Because they say a narcissist will form when their parents are neglectful in the giving of love and affection and attention. And this can happen because, let's say, both parents are working, right? So they feel bad about it and they try to make up for it by giving them everything they want, whether gifts and parties and what have you. Or it doesn't have to be the parents that do it. It can be like the grandparents or aunt, uncle, or friends of the family see how they're neglected, and they give them everything they want to make up for it. So what ends up happening is that the child gets this contradicting mixed message to them that they are not worth anything. They're not worth any love or affection or attention. They're not worth anything. But at the same time, they still deserve everything they want. So they become narcissistic, and they lack complete empathy because they think that they deserve whatever they want. But at the same time, they feel like they are shit. So they're tortured their whole lives. But at the same time, there's people who go through that and they become empathetic. So I was thinking that there's some kind of choice. But then I learned about uh, the Jews in bloodline and blood types. And it got me thinking. I made a video about this. I'm going to talk about it briefly right here before I move on, because it also has to tie with this parable. You can read Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46. But the main part of it is the fact that they're sheep and goats, and the sheep are going to be separated from the goats. Now, the question I have before I get into this is, can a tare become a wheat, or a goat become a sheep? A tare is a tare and a goat's a goat, right? They can't be converted, they can't be changed. And that's what I was talking about, that had to do with why Judas was treated differently than Peter, and why the religious leaders of the Jews was treated differently from the general populace. Because they were different, right? And I think it has something to do with this. You see, with the Jews, you're not a Jew because your father's a Jew, you're a Jew because your mother's a Jew. And I thought that was interesting because of blood types, where you see the positive sign here and the negative sign here. Well, you see, when you have a mother who is Rh negative, right? So she has the negative for the blood. If the father is positive and impregnates her, she might be able to have a child, the first child, but her body will try to kill it. It sees it as a foreign body, a virus, a bacteria, something that shouldn't be there. So she'll end up having a lot of miscarriages and all this stuff because her body actually tries to kill the child, right? So as a Jew, if your father's not a Jew, then that shows that you're not a Jew, right? But if the father is able to impregnate the Rh negative mother and she gives birth, then it shows that you're a Jew because she wouldn't give birth to you if you weren't, right? That's why you need to take this ROGAM shot or something like that if you're an Rh negative woman and your husband is Rh positive, right? So, with that being said, I think God's people are Rh negative and the devil's people are Rh positive. And don't freak out because I know the majority of the world is Rh positive. But that's why I need to explain here. You see how over here it says AB and AB, but over here it's only a single letter? Well, in reality, this is AA, BB, OO, and so is this, AA, BB, OO. Just because both of them are A, they just say A. Both of them are B, so they just say B, right? The only reason why they say AB over here is because there's two different ones. So they have to let you know, right? But in reality, you get a blood type from your father and your mother. So if you're type O, then your father and your mother gave an O to you, right? If you're blood type B, then the father or mother gave you a B, and then the second part of you is either B as well, or it's an O, right? So you can be BO. That sounds kind of funny. And if you're A, then you got A from either the father or the mother, and then the second one is either O or it's an A, right? And the same thing with negative. It's just that you don't have the RH factor, right? I hope you're following along. So, if you're Rh positive, that does not mean that you're fully Rh positive. You see, because if you're AB positive, well, the A could be positive, but the B is negative. Because you could have got the B from your negative mother or father, or vice versa, right? The same thing here. You could be A positive, but either the second one is negative or the first one is. And the same thing if you're B or if you're O. You got two O's, one O can be positive and the other one's negative. The only reason why they just label you as positive and not positive negative is because the only thing that's important for blood transfusion is if you're Rh positive or not. Because if you're Rh positive, then you can receive positive or negative blood. But you see, if you're negative, you cannot receive positive blood or you would probably die, right? It'd become toxic to you. So I hope you're able to follow along with that. That I think God's people are Rh negative, and with the mingling in with like Cain, I think he was mixed, right? So he was probably something like, I'm just going to say, to simplify things, Adam and Eve were O negative. Satan mingled in Cain, so he brought an O positive, and the second O is negative, so he's a mix. Then later on, A's and B's ended up coming in because of degradation and mutation. Because when the weird thing is that with A and B, is that an O, you see how an O does not have the A and B little things around the blood? The thing is that the O still has those antigens. They're just in the plasma, not on the blood cell. Right? So an O still has AB, it's just in the plasma that the blood floats in, but not on the blood cell. And an AB person has the antigens on the blood cell, but not in the plasma. Right? The difference is that when you have Rh positive, you have the Rh positive on the blood cell. People who are Rh negative don't have it on the blood cell, and they don't have it in the plasma. They have neither. It's not in any part of it. So that's what makes Rh factor very interesting, very weird, right? So I think there's something to that, where I think people who are full Rh positive, both of their blood types, whether they're AB, AA, AO, BB, BO, or OO, if they're all Rh positive, I think that they're a terror. They're a goat. I don't think there's any hope for them, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. But if you're a mix, then I think you could go either way. You can side one way or the other, right? Because the dispersion of the Jews, they were mixed all over the world. So most people are mixed. They're not fully Rh positive, right? They're mixed. And then if you're negative, I think you're naturally God's people. But I think you can choose to stick with your worldly family, even though they could be mostly Rh positive or a mix. You could go mix with the tares, you can go mix with the goats, and get bundled up with them when they go to get burned, right? But I don't think they have the option. If they're fully Rh positive, I don't think they could come over. I think that they are actually like the Nephilim. They can't be saved. And I think that's why Judas and these religious leaders were treated differently by Jesus. But continuing on with this, wrapping this up, in Jeremiah 13 at verse 23 it says, "Can the Ethiopian change his skin, or the leopard his spots? Then may ye also do good that are unaccustomed, or are accustomed to do evil." The reason why I bring this up is because of the leopard. The leopard is one of the beasts that represents one of the kingdoms in Daniel chapter 2 that I was just talking about. And it's talking about changing his spots, saying, it can't change its spots. That's what it's stuck with, right? That's the whole thing it's talking about. When somebody is a certain way, they are that way, right? They can't change. But then you come over here to Revelation chapter 13, talking about the beast, which a lot of people refer to as the Antichrist. It says, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard. His feet was as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority." So you see how he's generally looked at as a leopard, right? Leopard can't change his spots. I think it's telling us that he is a tare, he's a goat. And he's basically Satan's child, just as Jesus is God's child, right? And this is Satan's counterfeit Messiah, as the dragon represents the devil. As we read in Revelation chapter 12, it says the dragon is that old serpent, the devil, and a couple other things about him. Satan says a couple things like that about him. So they're all one and the same. So Satan gives the leopard the power as God the Father empowers Jesus, right? So we see the counterfeit going on here, and I think it actually has to do with actual blood types, spiritual stuff that actually make people either a wheat and a sheep where they're actually able to be saved, or it makes them a tare or a goat where they can't be saved. It's just how it is. Like a leopard can't change their spots, a tare can't become a wheat, and a goat can't become a sheep. And to wrap up this video, I want to say that I think people are waking up to this, and I think a lot of the people or basically all the people who are going to be raptured, realize that their family is not by blood. It's not by any relation like that, because you have the same father and mother and what have you. It actually has to do with something spiritual, right? And they realize this, so they realize that the people that they're going to be separated from, they're not really who they thought they were, right? They love him and they're attached to him, and that helps us to understand God's love for Lucifer, for Satan himself. But at the same time, understands why God helps us understand why God actually has to do what he has to do to Satan and his seed, right? We understand why he has to do it and that it has to be done, and we also know that he doesn't want to do it, but it's something that has to be done. And I think we're waking up to this, so we're able to be taken up as the first fruits here. But then the tribulation has to happen, and the mark of the beast has to go out, and all this has to happen. Why? Because it has to separate the wheat from the tares, because the wheat doesn't want to separate from the tares. They don't think there's anything wrong with the tares, right? We see today where people think that all kinds of things are okay. So you can't tell the wheat and the tares right now because it's all mixed together, where people think it's loving and good to be very tolerant of everything except for people who are not tolerant, right? So it's contradicting there, but tolerant of all the religions except for Christianity, at least fundamental Christianity, accepting of everybody's race except unless you're white, accepting of everybody's sexuality unless you're straight man, uh, and all these other things, kind of contradicting. And these people, I think a lot of them actually mean well, and they just want to be um, kind, and they want to love one another and be empathetic, right? And all this has to happen to show that there's people who are wheat and there's people who are tares. And it's to separate it, not just so God can know who his people are and who aren't, but so that we can see it, that the angels can see it, and it all be manifest who is on what side. Because right now it's all jumbled together. You know, the the farm, the harvest of wheat has tares all among it, and it's hard to tell the difference. So you need something to separate it. But the roots can be tangled together, right? So you got to do something to get that apart, and it's not going to be fun, and it's going to be painful, right? And I think that's one of the things that's going to be going on here real soon. One of the reasons why I feel compelled to make this video and to put this out, because yeah, you don't care about it now, but you will when it happens, right? And then you can be like, oh, I was told it before time, and now you know that you have to refuse the mark. So you're gonna lose out on your education, lose out on your career, lose out on your healthcare, lose out on food and water, on shelter, lose out on social status and a social life, and ultimately lose your life. That's what you're gonna have to do. And yeah, I mean, might sound all crazy and weird, but it's what's happening, right? But yeah, thanks for watching. Take care, right? I don't know what else to tell you.